Very important work, and hopefully will continue to be something that can be shared as a best practice. Just want to move forward. I know we have about 10 to 15 minutes left. I was given that opportunity. Is that okay? Because we started a bit late. All right, so wanted to touch on, we've talked a lot about some of the stressors, and I think it's important to also look at some of the opportunities, because in fact that's the name of our panel. And I want to touch upon some of the more proactive strategic things that you can consider. But to set that stage, there's social capital that can be gained from the non-essential parts of work, and these can be very important. One study provided the following description of managers who advanced rapidly. These fast-track managers spent relatively more time and effort socializing, politicking, and interacting with outsiders than did their less successful counterparts. However, research also suggests that women can find it difficult to engage in and benefit from informal networking and mentoring if they are a small minority. Carrie, I know that you've been looking at this at Amex, and I was wondering if you could share some of the learnings about mentoring regarding women and men.
Absolutely, yes. So you have to pay attention to the landscape in the organization that you are in, of course. But I can tell you without hesitation that American Express is a company that is based in relationships and in results. And if you put those two things together, it is a success formula. And when we look at the success rate, the promotion rates, the timed promotion for our women and our minority talent, as well as, or compared to, I should say, men, we do see it a bit slower, of course, and so we are taking a look at this, and we have a working hypothesis around what we're calling the sponsor effect. So this whole notion of having advocates of your work and having sponsors who speak on your behalf at the table when you are not there. Sponsors are typically those folks who are in the room making decisions about your career when you're not, and so it's a very critical, sponsors are critical people to have in your professional and personal life. When we look at success rates versus failure rates for women in our most senior roles, we don't feel a proverbial glass ceiling at American Express because we absolutely see women at every level, and we see success in the pipeline and advancement of women. But we do see when a failure rate happens, more often than not, and we're in the midst of this work now, so we'll get back with our full conclusions, but more often than not, it is a failure in sponsorship. So when the relationship between that senior female and her sponsor, who can be male or female, changes. So the sponsor leaves the organization, moves to a different job, is no longer at the table, or they have a falling out, which actually does happen, then it can often derail that woman's career. And the critical factor here is that women, we're finding, at a higher frequency rate, often have one sponsor. So the biggest takeaway today, go back and inventory. Who are your sponsors? Know who they are, and don't just have one, because they play a critical role in your career planning. And men typically have more sponsors at a table or multiple tables. And this has a direct link and correlation to networking. While women are very good collaborators, I think it's a natural, inherent skill, I'm generalizing, but across the board for women, our networks are not often as strong as men's, and then therefore our sponsorship can often be lacking.
Thank you, Carrie. LeMay, I know that you've also done some research on this, and from the practices there, mentoring, how important is it?
It's incredibly important, and I referenced some research earlier. Within the same research that we did, we found surprisingly only 14% of our women actually participated and found effective mentoring relationships, 14%. Now, there's a greater percentage that value mentoring, but in terms of feeling that there has been successful mentoring relationships, the percentage is fairly small, which I think is another call to action for all of us, that there's an opportunity there that we shouldn't lose out on. I'd also like to just add, Carrie talked a lot about sponsorship. I think we often get confused between mentoring and sponsorship.
Different. Yeah.
And another takeaway is to not get confused over that. Sponsorship is absolutely critical. As Carrie mentioned, you have to be very deliberate in doing that power map to understand within your own environment and company who are the influential players, who commands the respect, because everyone at the table may not command the respect. So you've got to make sure it's the right sponsors. And then on mentoring, I think it's just as important to have a network of mentors external to your company. So I applaud the work that Goldman's doing that Anesh mentioned, to provide a channel for females to be able to expand their mentoring outside of the company, as well as internal. And yes, mentors need to include our male counterparts as well in that. So I would just offer those.
Okay.
I just want to add one
I'm
thing
going to take the power of the mic.
Okay.
We are running out of time, so I'm going to just quickly see if there are one or two comments from the audience. And while the audience is collecting their thoughts, I see someone else that I can call upon, putting her on the spot. Lisa Broomer from JP Morgan Chase. You and I had a quick conversation earlier, and you had some interesting thoughts to share. So while Lisa gets to the microphone, if there are one or two others who have some closing comments or questions, if you could just come to the microphone. We'll have time for probably a total of 3, and then I want to get back to my illustrious colleagues, if they could share some closing thoughts about why it's not the end of the golden age of diversity.
Okay, thank you. I actually find myself in a very interesting job at JP Morgan right now. I am the head of the Women's Network, but I do that, I'm not sure what we call it, at night on the side, in the morning.
Volunteer.
I do that as my volunteer activity, and I actually am responsible for capital reporting at JP Morgan. So it's certainly been a busy place to be and an interesting place to be. But it's also been a very stressful place to be. So I think all of the things that have come up today and that this panel has talked about have really resonated with me. One of the things that I think we need to do is figure out how to pick a few simple things that we can do that will actually make us feel a lot better. A colleague of mine who is a reasonably senior manager brought her management team together and told them, it's time for your one thing. And you have to tell me what your one thing is, and I'm going to tell you what my one thing is, so that we can actually help each other do that one thing to bring more balance. In this case, they were talking about work-life balance. And so whether it's something as simple as what's your one thing, and I can share with all of you my one thing and the fact that I've not been very successful at it, so I have to get back on it. But I think there are a couple of things that everyone can take away. You can create organization around chaos, right? So there's even something called chaos theory. So although we all feel like we're in this extremely unpredictable environment where we never know what's going to happen the next day, and if we look back over the last 18 months, some of the things that we never thought were possible to happen have happened, the fact is that as we think about moving forward, we are in that kind of an environment that's not going away anytime soon. And so we need to think about how to manage within a new paradigm of chaos theory. Let's think about what are the random things that could be happening that will, knock me off track, and am I prepared to deal with those things? So I think that's one thing. The other thing that I would say, and I know we all tend, and we've talked a lot about the influence on women in particular, whether it's salary, whether it's job opportunity. I've heard colleagues of mine use this euphemism, and I think it's the right one. Make sure you put your oxygen mask on first. So the fact is that right now more than ever, and it goes to what Meryl asked, it goes to what a lot of people have been talking about, we need to take care of ourselves. And it's very hard to do because our natural tendency as women, again, not generalizing, but we do generalize, is to always put other people first. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that if we work ourselves to the bone and we either get sick or we get stressed, or we get frustrated, or we just walk out the door and we end up in the wrong one of Supa's categories because we just give up, we can't help anybody else, and we actually are doing a lot of damage to ourselves. Great. So I would say, organization within the chaos, and make sure that you take care of yourself.
Very sage. Thank you so much. It's sort of the shoemaker's children never have shoes.